Acts 7 picks up where Acts chapter 6 leaves off with the story of Stephen. So the high priest asked Stephen, are these accusations true? The false accusations that were brought against him. And bear in mind that Stephen could have certainly said, no, they're not true, and defended himself. But look at what it says. This was Stephen's reply. Brothers and fathers, listen to me. Our glorious God appeared to our ancestor Abraham in Mesopotamia before he settled in Haran. And what Stephen's going to do here, instead of just giving him the short answer and defending himself, Stephen is going to preach the gospel to them. Now remember, the crowd here, they're Jewish. They certainly understand the Old Testament. So if you read Stephen's sermon here, now we've seen a few of Peter's sermons, and Peter's sermons were a lot shorter. Stephen's going to go all the way back to the Old Testament, and he's going to build the case for how God was working all the while, from all the way back in Genesis. And you see this long sermon here, and God was working to bring Jesus into the picture. But Stephen is preaching this sermon with his audience in mind, trying to build a bridge for them, trying to help them to understand who Jesus is in the context. Instead of just defending himself, he says, I'm going to use this opportunity to share with you about Jesus. And remember, Stephen's just the deacon. He's not even one of the 12 apostles. He's someone who has the Spirit of God and just a pretty normal guy. And look at how God is using him. But look at what he says at the end of his little sermon. He says in verse 51, you stubborn people, you are heathen at heart and deaf to the truth. Must you forever resist the Holy Spirit? That's what your ancestors did, and so do you. And it says in verse 54, the Jewish leaders were infuriated by his accusation, and they shook their fists at him in rage. It says that they put their hands over their ears and began shouting. They rushed at him and dragged him out of the city and began to stone him. And his accusers took off their coats and laid them at the feet of a young man named Saul. Okay, so keep in mind, Saul, you're going to meet him again later, not just in the next chapter, but in chapter 9, you're going to see what God does with this guy, Saul, because spoiler alert, Saul is Paul. Okay, but this is the first time we meet Saul, and he's there approving of the death. And it says that Stephen prayed, Lord, receive my spirit. And he fell to his knees, shouting, Lord, don't charge them with this sin. And then he died. And so Stephen is the first Christian martyr after the death of Christ. So it's a pretty inspiring story to see how Stephen is wrongly accused. Jesus also is wrongly accused. And instead of defending himself, he shares the truth with them. He gives them an opportunity to receive the gospel. Apparently they don't receive the gospel, but a little seed is planted with this guy named Saul, certainly. And Stephen dies, and he's the first Christian martyr. So go ahead and read Acts chapter 7. We'll see you tomorrow for chapter 8.